3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello and welcome to I Bought a Watch. I'm sure most of you watching will be all too familiar with the watch that this is based on. But how does this £120 Phylida stack up against a watch that literally went to the moon? Yes, that's right, you did hear me correctly. The watch that this Phylida is based on accompanied the crew of Apollo 11 on their maiden voyage up to and then out onto the surface of our moon. And that watch is of course the Omega Speedmaster. The watch was originally released in 1957 as a sports and racing chronograph, with the Speedmaster name referring to the design's iconic tachymeter bezel. It wasn't until 1965 that NASA officially launched a set of qualities that they were looking for in a space-worthy chronograph. And it wasn't only Omega that stood up to the challenge, with the other two contenders being Rolex and Longines. NASA outlined 11 challenges for the watches. These included extreme pressures, temperatures, humidity, shock resistance, and acceleration, just to name a few. If you're interested in learning more about how these watches did, I highly recommend watching Jason the Watch Guy's video on this, where he goes into a bit more detail. Long story short, the Omega passed with flying colours, managing to remain largely within a 5 seconds per day rate and hence won the contract. Since then, the officially certified Speedmasters have garnered quite an impressive CV in regard to space exploration, starting with the Gemini 4 mission accompanying Ed White on the first American spacewalk. Then of course a big one where Buzz Aldrin of the Apollo 11 crew elected to wear his Speedmaster on his first moonwalk, which he later wrote, and I quote, "Few things are less necessary when walking around on the moon than knowing what time it is in Texas." Nonetheless, being a watch guy, I decided to strap the Speedmaster onto my right wrist. Now that is a true watch guy, and I'm sure Omega are very thankful for that decision. Okay, that's enough history for a watch we don't have with us today. This watch is the Phylida Moonwatch, a homage of the Speedmaster used on the Apollo 11 mission. And I picked this one up for just under £120 in the most recent AliExpress sale. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can pick one of these up, and that will be an affiliate link. Okay, so I'm going to be changing up the format on my videos a little bit and making them a bit more in-depth and slightly longer. So initially I'm going to go through the normal review, going over dimensions and specifications like normal. Then give you a wrist shot and some alternative looks on a selection of different strap options I've got. And I must say there are a couple of really good ones, so stick around for that. And lastly, I want to close out with a new part of each episode I'm going to call Reasons Not to Buy This Watch. Now, let me explain. I want to do this for multiple reasons. Firstly, when I'm buying something, I usually already want it. And that's why I'm looking at reviews. And I always find myself wanting to know what are the negatives? What are the possible fallbacks that I don't want surprising me, and if I come to terms with those things, then there's really no reason for me not to buy the piece. And secondly, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of us spend far too much money on watches, so if I can save some of you making purchases that you aren't going to be happy with, well, that's going to be great too. Okay, let's get on to some specifications. Dimension-wise, we have a diameter of 40mm at the bezel. However, the actual case diameter is 42mm due to the copied asymmetric case dimensions, making it slightly wider on the side with the crown and pushers. The lug-to-lug is 49mm, however, due to those protruding male end links, the actual lug-to-lug is more like 57mm, so if you're worried, be sure to check out some of the other strap options and how it wears on my wrist. Thankfully, the 20mm lug width makes finding other straps for this one very easy. However, the 13mm thickness does make this one wear a little high, even though a few millimeters are taken up by that stunning top hat sapphire crystal. Just look at that beautiful distortion you get as you play with this one. And thankfully, because it's made of sapphire, you don't have to worry about scratching it up. Although sadly, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of anti-reflective coating on the underside, making this one slightly hard to read in direct sunlight. The dial draws practically all its inspiration from the original Omega Moonwatch, with its distinctive pencil-styled hour and minute hands and arrowhead chronograph hand, which stand out against that matte black dial, maximizing legibility. And above, the words Phylida Chronograph Mechanical are printed below the 12 o'clock. The watch features 3 subdials located at the 3, 6 and 9 o'clock positions. displaying a 30-minute chronograph timer, a live 12-hour register, which is essentially copying the main hour hand, and a live running seconds, respectively. The subdials are nicely done and are slightly concave with a concentric circle texture on the lower portion, and each feature a high contrast white hand. Edging the dial are applied batten indices, with half batten indices at the 3, 6 and 9 to accommodate those subdials, and the addition of 2 applied dots either side of that 12 o'clock. Sadly, unlike on the original, these are not loomed, however the main handset and markers are. Here's a brief 2-minute loom shot that I've sped up for you guys. As you can see, it starts off quite bright, but over the course of just a few minutes, it's already visibly diminished in brightness, so I highly doubt that this one will make it through the night, although it's a pretty good effort from an AliExpress piece. Printed outside and in between those applied indices is a simple minute track, with precise 1/5 of a second increments to allow for accurate chronograph readings. The section of the dial on which the minute track is printed is also patterned with concentric circles, which gives the dial an additional depth that I personally think looks great. Setting off the chronograph gives a nice audible click when pressing those pushers. I'll just leave that running as we take a look around this case. Bordering that wonderfully boxed sapphire crystal is the infamous fixed tachymeter bezel with a steel insert, which, without going into too much detail, allows you to make quick speed, distance and time calculations when used in conjunction with the chronograph. The rest of the case features that signature twisted lug that is so iconic with Omega designs, and feature a high polish running along the top of that beveled edge. This starts at the tip of the lugs and wraps around the edge of the case and down to the opposite lug in one fluid line, beautifully framing that dial. Another feature of this case, which I mentioned earlier, is that it is slightly offset and means that the case and lugs protrude slightly more on the sign with the crown and pushers. This not only means that the dial is slightly smaller, reducing the watch's wrist presence, but also offers some additional protection in the form of guards for those pushers and crown. Another feature of this case that I love is the way that the tachymeter bezel actually flares out from the rest of the case, giving this watch a really unique side profile. As the sweeping chronograph hand passes the minute mark, you will notice the instantaneous change on the 30-minute chronograph subdial at the 3 o'clock position, indicating that a minute has elapsed. And there you go. Pushing the top pusher will cause the chronograph to stop running, and the bottom will reset with that instant flyback function. With all of this being made possible by this beautiful Seagull ST19 movement. Just look at it. I've talked a little bit more about this movement in the Vintage Racing Chronograph by Gakota, but just to go over a little more, down here at the bottom is what is known as a column wheel, which allows you to disengage and re-engage the chronograph hand from the main movement. Honestly, this movement is stunning, and the fact that they've put a massive display case back on this piece is testament to its beauty. Just to go over some specs, this is a 20 jewel Seagull ST19, which is hand winding, doesn't have hacking, and has approximately 42 hours of power reserve. Moving on to this watch's bracelet, it is pretty standard fare from what you can expect from a lot of other AliExpress offerings in this kind of price range. It's a solid 5-link bracelet, and I had to remove 4 extra links to fit it on my 7.5-inch wrist. As you can see, even the tiny half links are solid pieces of metal. This is a nice touch and definitely a cut above what you would expect from other affordable watches. However, I would like to mention that these links aren't separated at the clasp and the solid end links at the case, and feature the annoying protruding mid link. The buckle is well machined and I've had no problems with it, and features double pusher release. It is, however, unfortunately unsigned, and I would have liked to have seen Phylida sign this. The clasp is flush with the bracelet, which is 20mm thick and features no taper. An interesting addition to this bracelet, which isn't featured on the original Speedmaster, is the addition of a diver's extension. This diver's extension is about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters and is quite a lot more than the typical sweaty day extension found on most sports divers. Although I could never imagine or recommend taking this Phylida diving with you, I have found a use for that diver's extension, which I'll show you in a little bit. Speaking of diving, this watch has a rated water resistance of 70 meters, although I must confess I've never taken it or dipped it in the water aside from washing my hands. Oh, I should probably mention the crown and pushers are unsigned like that clasp. Definitely something I want to see Phylida do in the future. Let's slip this on the wrist. Actually, before I do, I was talking about how I use the diver's extension, and I actually use it to easily slip on this watch. I typically like to wear my watches really tight due to my hairy wrists to stop the bracelet pinching, so to have this extra extension to get it over my hand is actually quite nice. There you go, nice and secure, and what a piece this is. I must say, this piece looks brilliant. It really looks a lot more than that £120 price tag, and when you're factoring in that this features a hand-winding mechanical column wheel chronograph inside for that price, honestly, I think this is kind of one of the best value watches I've ever had on the channel. Now, of course, that's not to say there aren't improvements. For one, this bracelet, even though I wear it quite tight, does tend to pinch some of the hairs on my wrist. But as a testament to this piece's wearability, I still find myself reaching for it. But just to entertain some other strap options, and for some of you guys out there with smaller wrists that want to see what this looks like without those protruding mid-links, I've selected a few strap options that I think go rather well with this piece. A green NATO, this rubber dive strap, which surprisingly I think looks great, and this trusty old brown crocodile leather strap. Alright, let the strap show begin. First off, here's a closer look at that stock bracelet. As you can see, it does have solid end links. And actually, it might be worth trying this on the Corgeut 007 Spectre watch I have. Next up, we have the olive NATO. And now, unfortunately, this one doesn't actually work out as well as I had hoped. Because although it looks great, and Speedmasters look so at home on a NATO, this one, unfortunately, because of its lack of curved lugs, sits so high on the wrist that I couldn't really recommend this to anyone. Just look at that gap at the lugs, that I would really have a hard time recommending this to anyone except if they had a massive wrist, which is a shame because it really does look pretty great. Perhaps it would work a little better on a single pass NATO. Next up, we have the crocodile leather strap, and this one really brings out that vintage racing heritage. I think this one does look great, and the Omega Speedmaster is renowned for being a strap monster, so it's no surprise that the Phylida can pull off all these different straps. But how does it look on a rubber strap? Well, in my opinion, I think it looks pretty great. And I might just be saying that because I'm so surprised at how well it works. Being silicone, it's incredibly comfortable and makes the watch sit flush on my wrist. And because it doesn't have those end links, it makes the watch fit better on smaller wrists. Okay, that does it for the strap show. Now let's get on to the section where I persuade you not to buy this watch. To start off, this is a homage piece. So this is not an original design, and if you're not comfortable with that, I can't recommend you to buy this piece. Secondly, this watch does cost £120, which is quite a lot of money for some people. So I do want to point out some of the little QC issues which perfectionists might find annoying. First off, on the 9 o'clock sub-dial, the indicator above the 60 is slightly misprinted. Either that or there is a bit of debris on the marker, but it's so small it's quite hard to tell. Moving on, the applied indice at the 9 o'clock position is slightly askew. This luckily only seems to be a problem with the small applied indices, as all the larger indices seem to be pretty well aligned. The next thing I want to point out is these little pips either side of the 12 o'clock indice, which on the original Speedmaster are loomed to indicate 12 o'clock in low light conditions. On this version, they have no use at all, so there's definite room for improvement. Another place I feel like Phylida could have improved is this bracelet. Although it has solid links and is relatively well constructed for the most part, there are a few links here that do catch and will require you to wear the bracelet a lot until they break in or manually go in and sand them down. Speaking of sanding down, on the inside of this bracelet, there are a few spots on the links where there are some machining marks, such as here on this little link, that for the most part don't affect how the bracelet wears at all, but it is something to point out and does show that there was a lack of refinement on the machining of this bracelet. Oh look, there's another machining mark there. And I know that obviously this is only a £120 watch, so it's not going to have the same standard as a actual Speedmaster. However, I'm just saying this because you can pick watches up that are exactly the same quality, if not a little better, for half the price. Pagani Design offers the Submariner Homage for about £60. That Didun design that I reviewed a few weeks back had comparable finishing So I just want to mention that for your £120, you're not necessarily getting twice the quality control. And probably the last thing and most annoying thing is that fake lug-to-lug. So this lug-to-lug of 57mm is quite huge. Now, it does work on other strap options like I showed, but if you don't have wrists of, I would say, at least 7 inches, I wouldn't recommend buying this one, unless you're comfortable with switching out that strap. And then you got to ask yourself, is this watch head effectively worth £120? Just some food for thought. Okay, well that concludes my section on why not to buy this watch. So my closing thoughts on this watch is I kind of love it. I wasn't expecting it. £120 was definitely at the upper end of my budget to spend on an AliExpress piece. But when I saw that it had the seagull movement inside, and it was in the sale, and I was interested in getting a watch with a Seagull ST19 movement after reviewing that Gakota. It was like the stars aligned, and I'm really happy that I pulled the trigger. So that concludes it for this episode. Sorry it's been so long. I've been really busy this past week doing work stuff because the UK is starting to open back up. I think schedule-wise, I might do an update video, but for now, I'm thinking of one episode per week, one of these longer kind of 20-minute episodes, and scrap the unboxing videos. Please let me know what you think. I really do value you guys, the subscribers' opinions on this. And let me know what you think about the new format, Don't Buy This Watch. I think it's a pretty fun idea, but would love to hear what you guys think. As always, stay safe. I'll see you in the next episode. Hopefully it's not too far away. Like and subscribe if you're new. Bye for now.